Hello, my name is Kevin Vandecar. I work in the Developer Advocacy and Support Group within the Autodesk group that supports the ADN program, Autodesk Developer Network, and also the Autodesk Platform Services. So I'm here to talk today about the new GraphQL layer that we've built for the Data Exchange. So for those of you who are new to Data Exchange, I'm going to show how to create a data exchange real quick. And I'm also going to talk about how to use GraphQL. So the beta is starting now, and we definitely want to hear your feedback in terms of how this GraphQL works out for you in terms of accessing your data in a data exchange. So let's get started. First of all, let's review what a data exchange is. So basically, Data Exchange currently lives in the Autodesk Construction Cloud, ACC, documents environment. So ACC Docs is where the Data Exchange is created. Now going forward, there's lots of options here, and we're considering moving it to BIM 360 Docs as well, and even potentially outside of the AEC world into other storage facilities. So the exchange itself is an intermediate set of data that is coming from a product such as Revit, and today it's mainly Revit, but it will be other products participating in the future. So what you can do is in Revit, you can set up a view with just the elements that you would like to exchange or share with someone else. So maybe you want to share structural elements with Inventor so that those structural elements could be manufactured. Maybe you want to share Revit data with Power Automate so that you could estimate costs for the number of windows, for example. And because this has a full API and it's currently moving into GraphQL, any customer, third-party developer, anyone who wants to access the data for other purposes can do so. It's an open platform. So today we do have connectors to Inventor, Power Automate, Rhino, and more to come. And that's because we do have this API layer that's going to be available and allowing you to basically connect to anything you want as you need. So the original release of this, which was a few months ago, we introduced REST APIs. The REST APIs are very complex, and the data that comes back is kind of all or nothing situation. So our other information model, Fusion Data, introduced GraphQL, last year, and it was very popular. So people really recognized how powerful GraphQL is to access data in kind of a data-oriented way. So that just encouraged the Data Exchange team to also, investigate GraphQL, and here we are with a public beta now ready to go. So we encourage you to take a look at it, and I'm going to start by showing kind of the user workflow in terms of how to create the exchange. So I will switch over to my Autodesk Docs account, and I'm in the Docs area. I'm in a project called FDX Testing, and I have my project files, and you can see there's a number of folders here. So I have a number of different people working in the same project, and I've created a folder specifically for this testing. So I'm going to open that folder, and you'll see that I have one Revit file. So this is based on the basic sample that comes with Revit. It's been there for many years. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by loading that up in the viewer and getting to the point where I can look at all of the sheets and views. Okay, so you'll see the sheets and views showing up over here on the left. And I have a number of different views that I created within that sample that will help us to look at the data. So I'm going to choose DX Walls 2, and you'll see that the view contains just the interior and exterior walls of the main house. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create data exchange. Okay, I'm going to name the data exchange the same as the view itself, and I'm going to put it in the same folder just so we have it. And you'll see already that this is a subset of the original Revit model. So there's 25 objects in this, and it consists of just wall types. And that's because in Revit I set it up to be that way. Okay, so I'll go ahead and create the exchange. All right, now once the exchange is finished, you'll be able to see the exchange in your set of files. So I'm going to close this, and now you'll see there's my exchange. Now, even though this looks like a file, it's really not. It's just a placeholder kind of pointer to the actual exchange in the information model. Okay, so this is just a placeholder. Now we can open up the exchange, and within the ACC Docs environment, we have a viewer capable model here. We can look at that. And nothing else from the original Revit model is in this except for these walls that I selected to do exchange on. Okay, so that exchange is completed, and what we can do now is let's take a look at the documentation for GraphQL for data exchange. So you'll find a developer's guide, just like with all of our other APIs. There's a video here that talks a little bit more about what exchanges are all about. We talk about what GraphQL is all about and give some examples of generic queries and how you use GraphQL. So there's quite a bit of information just at this developer's guide level. But what I'd like to do is point you to the tutorial section. We have very task-oriented tutorial here for Data Exchange GraphQL, and this will help you to become familiar with creating queries for accessing the data in a data exchange. Okay, so we're in the tutorial, and the very first step is talking about this Data Exchange Explorer. So this Explorer is called GraphQL, and it's a component that's provided by the GraphQL community, and it basically allows you to explore creating GraphQL queries on your own data. Okay, so it starts pre-populated with a query that's designed for data exchange, and so if we execute that, you're going to see it accesses my account, and it's listing all the hubs that I have access to. All right. Now it's giving back just the name, and so it can show me what's available to me, but name really isn't enough to move on. So in the results, I also want to have ID so that I can use that in the next step. Okay, so here you see running it again. It's the same query, but now I've added ID and it's providing that as output. So this is where the idea of granular data access comes into play. Whatever you need to get access to is what you ask for, and you don't get any more and you don't get any less. So I could go ahead and take name away, for example, and run this, and now I'm going to get just the IDs. All right, it doesn't necessarily make sense in this context, but it's the idea of asking for what you need and getting just that information. Now, just one other feature of the GraphQL Explorer I want to show is this history. Okay, and it basically keeps a stack of the last, I don't know what it is, 20 queries that you've executed. So you can play around with it and you can go back to queries that you've created. Okay, so you can kind of fiddle around with it that way. So that's kind of a nice benefit. Now you can see that when we go back over to the tutorial, task number 1 is to request a list of hubs, and they've added this ID parameter exactly the way we executed it in this case. All right, so that's step 1. What we're going to do next is go on to step 2, and you'll see here we're going to take some of the data from the previous step, and we're going to use it as a variable to pass into this query. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by copying this query into the Data Explorer. So we'll delete that query and we'll put in a new query. Now by itself, this isn't going to execute, right? Because I don't have the data that needs to be passed in to this query. So it's asking for hub ID. All right, so that's where these query variables come into play. So if we go back to this one and we go ahead and execute that again, what we need is the ID. And the one that I'm going to be working with is this construction records testing. So I'm going to take this ID and I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say, okay, I need a JSON variable and I want to do, oh, I'm sorry, I want to do this query. So I'm going to copy that again, switch back over to the Data Explorer, paste that in here, and the input name should be hub ID. So hub ID, and as soon as I start typing, you can see contextually it knows that it's called hub ID. So I can just click it, and whoops, I need to come over here and copy this piece of data, the ID of that hub. Okay, and now I can execute that, and you'll see I get more, I go deeper. So I started at the hub level, and now I'm getting the projects that are within that hub. And now that I've got back the projects, I need to decide, which project I'm going to go down into. All right, so I'm going to use this FDX testing prod, and that project name is this one. Okay, so that's the one I'm going to be using. Now I also need to move on to the next task. So I'm going to pick an item. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this query. I keep switching. Let's go there. Okay. I'll remove that query, add a new one. Okay, and now I need 3 values. Okay, so hub ID, we already have that. I need item ID. So I'm going to start by typing that one. And item ID is the folder within the project. So I'm going to start with this one called project files. And so that's this ID. Okay. And then I also need the project ID. Okay, and that's this ID underneath the project name. Okay, so this is in JSON form, and it's going to get passed into the query. So project ID will go here, item ID second, hub ID. And what am I going to get back? I'm going to get the ID, the name, and the extension type. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And notice that there's a pagination argument here. So when I execute this, I get 5 results back, and that makes sense. But this, I know that this project has many other folders. And so I'm going to bump this up to 200 and execute it again so that I can get everything back. Okay, and now you'll see there's a large number of projects in that folder. And if we go back to our docs, let's go ahead and exit out of that. You can see here are all the folders that are in this project. Okay, so the one that I want is Kevin V GraphQL testing, and switching back to the output in the Data Explorer, I could manually search for it, and Kevin V, it's going to find both of them that were listed. I have 2 folders, so here's the first one, and there's the one that I really want. Now, from a runtime programming perspective, that's not so convenient. This is just kind of fooling around or twiddling with it during, with the user interface. So what if I want to search for that directly? Okay. Okay, so I was able to find my folder, but again, it's in this big long list. So what if I know the folder name ahead of time and I just want to get to it directly? What I need is the ID. So I know the folder name. So let's go ahead and put in a filter. Okay, so I'm filtering on the name, and the name should be this. Okay, and that's what that name is. Now, if I execute that, I'm going to get back exactly what I think. It's just the one item in my data set with the name that I wanted. Now, the one thing you have to be careful with is that pagination does have something to do with the amount of results you're filtering. So if I was to execute this back with the original query, it's not going to find it because it's actually filtering on the outer query, and I had 200 limit there. So my data set that comes back from this part of the query contains the item that I want. So you have to make sure that your limits are set properly if you're not getting back things that you would expect to be there. Okay, now the next thing to just talk quickly about is this extension type. Okay, so if you notice over here, you see we still are looking at folders. And what we want is an exchange, right? We want to get the data from an exchange. So I'm still iterating down in folders. So the next step is to kind of execute this again, except now we're going to use that item ID. Okay, I'm going to swap out this one, and I'm no longer going to filter for a name because I only have a couple of design files in there, one Revit file, one Exchange, in fact. And we can reduce this, and now I execute, and you'll see I've got back the items within that folder. Okay, so I went to this level with the first query to find that folder, and then I queried on that folder to find the things that was within it. And you'll see here my exchange is called DX Walls 2. Okay, so we can go back over here, and it's this one that we need. All right, so I'm going to copy this one. That's the one we need. And actually, I'm going to also go back to the documentation. And so we are now on task 4. Now that we've gotten down to the exchange level, we can actually go and get the exchange. So I'm going to take this query now for exchanges. Oops. And I'm going to put it back in my query. And you'll see that the variable is exchange file URN. So I'm just going to copy that to make it convenient to put here. And what I really want is this one. Okay, it was called DX Walls 2. I'm going to copy that URN, come down here and just replace that one that came from the docs. And I'll go ahead and execute again. Okay, and there's my exchange. So all of those steps through step 4 of the tutorial is just iterating down using basically GraphQL over data management layer, those REST APIs that you may be used to from, using ACC docs with REST, etc. It's the same idea, except now you can do it in GraphQL, and you can kind of iterate down until you find the data you want. All right, so at this level, we're going to see property definitions and the results. And property definitions is here. So we've asked for, first of all, the name of the exchange, which is here, and then the property definitions as results, and we're getting the name, type, units, and value type. So you'll see for each block, it's basically the same, okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom here, and I want to show that some, you have the ability to put custom data through as well. So this happens to be one of my own properties that I put in a Revit file, and it actually comes through as a property here as well. All right, so now that we know how to get down into the data exchange, we can start actually looking for properties and values and things that we want. So back over into the tutorial, task 5, 6, and 7 are all very similar about kind of drilling down into design entities and getting information based on category and property values and property names and so forth. So using this custom property as an example to start with, I basically built another query. Now, one thing I'm string, and in this case, I'm going to use category name walls, and I'm going to do some filtering. So let's comment out this first, okay? So you can put a pound sign in front of any line to comment it out in GraphQL, so that's a good way to kind of also be exploring. And let's go ahead in my property set. I'm going to filter by all the elements that are category walls that have this property on them. Okay, so I execute that, and you'll see I get some good data back, and it's quite a bit again. Now let's say what we want to do is we want to actually look a little closer at the values, okay? And that's what this step 7 does, is it adds an additional property filter. So this filters on a property. I'm going to look for the name that have value that's 10 or greater than using this operator. Okay, so we have some operators that allow you to do value ranges, and remember with floating point numbers, numbers aren't exactly rounded, so the way they get stored can be different. So in this case, for example, it's 62.1299999, and so you want to get used to doing kind of things in ranges when you're dealing with floating point numbers. But we'll go ahead and execute this. And now it's getting me all of the items that have this property name on it with a value greater than 10. Okay, so you'll see that all of these values are greater than 10. And we can change that to less than 10. And there aren't any. Okay, so let's change this to maybe 50 and execute it again. And now you'll see the 32 and the 42 that were found in the other data set, okay? And if you look in detail at the query, the results include the ID, the name, the classification, and then the category, just to confirm. Now, you wouldn't necessarily need to output that once you trust, that it's finding category walls. Maybe you don't need to see that. And then within that, the property definition. So within these properties, we're going to further look for an output description, specification, type, and units. Okay, so that's why these are here. All right, so essentially that's it. That's how you get started with GraphQL. The Explorer is a great way to get started. Make sure you make use of history. It helps you to go back and forth and do different tests. And when you're ready to actually start moving to production code, you'll find some sample code here. We're going to have a 4th sample very soon. So there's 4 samples that you can go to and pull out of GitHub that actually shows you how to format those GraphQL queries in production code. So you can get started very quickly and start working with it. We really would encourage you to, take a look and give us some feedback. GraphQL is kind of new to everyone, so we really would appreciate your feedback. All right, so let me just switch back over here and just remind you, that Data Exchange is currently working with Revit 2023. So you need to have at least that version to publish. There is a Revit connector that works in native Revit that allows you to publish, but both that connector and the publish within ACC Docs, it requires ACC Docs, okay, because the storage is there. So just remember, you need Revit 2023, you need ACC Docs account, and then you can start publishing exchanges and then going at it with the Data Explorer to check out the data and figure out, the best way to get the data that you need for your own purposes. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for watching.